I never expected to end up in a place like Pine Hollow, a tiny town buried deep in the heart of nowhere. But after the chaos of the city had worn me down, the idea of a quiet, uneventful life seemed appealing. I had grown tired of the constant noise, the endless rush, and the feeling of always being on edge. Pine Hollow promised the opposite: serenity, predictability, and most importantly, a chance to start over. The town itself was the sort of place that looked like it had been trapped in time. There was one main street lined with aging brick buildings, a few scattered houses, and a general store that seemed to serve as the heart of the community. People were friendly enough, but there was a certain wariness in their eyes whenever they looked at me, the outsider. I brushed it off as small-town suspicion, convinced that I'd fit in soon enough. Finding a job was easy, there weren't many to be had, and the convenience store on the edge of town was always looking for help. It wasn't glamorous work, but it paid the bills. The manager, a wiry man named Frank with a perpetually furrowed brow, was happy to hire me on the spot. "Night shift's all yours if you want it," he had said, his voice gruff but not unkind. "Not much to do but keep the shelves stocked and the coffee fresh. We don't get many customers after dark, so it's easy work." The store was a relic from another era, its shelves stocked with the basics: canned goods, cigarettes, lottery tickets, and the ever-present smell of stale coffee. It was open 24/7, though I quickly learned that the night shift was often devoid of any real human interaction. The locals preferred to get their shopping done during the day, and the road that passed by the store was mostly deserted after sunset. My first night on the job passed without incident. I busied myself with organizing the shelves, cleaning the counters, and making small talk with a few customers who wandered in. They were mostly regulars, old men buying newspapers and cigarettes, truckers passing through, and the occasional teenager grabbing a soda. Frank had been right, it was easy work, almost too easy. As the weeks went by, I settled into a routine. I'd arrive just before 10 p.m., brew a fresh pot of coffee, and spend the first couple of hours restocking and cleaning. Around midnight, I'd take a break, sipping on my coffee as I stared out into the empty parking lot, the neon sign of the store casting a dull red glow over the cracked asphalt. The rest of the night was usually quiet, with only the faint buzz of the overhead lights and the occasional creak of the old wooden floorboards to keep me company. But then things started to change. It began subtly, almost imperceptibly. At first, I noticed small, inconsequential things. Items on the shelves would be out of place, even though I was certain I had just organized them. A can of soup would be turned the wrong way. A box of cereal would be on the wrong shelf. I chalked it up to my own inattentiveness, or maybe even the customers who came in while I wasn't looking. But then, the noises started. I'd be in the back of the store, restocking the coolers, when I'd hear a faint tapping, like someone drumming their fingers on the glass. I'd turn, expecting to see a customer, but the store would be empty. The tapping would stop as soon as I looked, leaving only the low hum of the coolers in its wake. It was unnerving, but I told myself it was nothing, a trick of the mind, a result of working alone late at night. The tapping was soon followed by the sound of footsteps. They were faint, barely more than a whisper against the floor, but distinct enough to make the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. They would come from behind me, from the aisles just out of sight, and always stop the moment I turned around. It was as if someone or something was playing a game with me, taunting me from the shadows. I began to dread my shifts. The store, once a mundane place of routine, had taken on a sinister air. The shadows seemed to grow darker, thicker, as if they were alive, watching me from the corners of the room. The once comforting hum of the lights now felt oppressive, like it was masking something that was hiding just beyond my perception. Then, one night, everything escalated. It was around 2 a.m., the dead of night, when I heard the door chime. I had been in the middle of sweeping the floor, the monotonous task giving me a momentary reprieve from the creeping dread that had become my constant companion. The sound of the chime was so unexpected that I almost dropped the broom. I turned, expecting to see a customer, but the store was empty. The door, however, was wide open. A cold breeze swept in from outside, carrying with it the scent of rain and something foul, like rotting meat. I rushed to the door and peered out into the night. The parking lot was empty, and the road beyond was dark, with no sign of life. I stepped outside, the cold air biting into my skin, and looked around. There was no one there. As I stood in the doorway, I heard a sound behind me, a soft, shuffling noise, like something being dragged across the floor. My heart leapt into my throat as I turned, my eyes straining to see into the dimly lit store. The noise stopped, and for a moment everything was deathly silent. Then, the lights flickered. It was just a brief flicker, a momentary dimming, but in that split second I saw something. A figure, standing in the middle of the aisle, tall and thin, its features obscured by shadow. It was there one moment and gone the next, as if it had never been there at all. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over my own feet, as I scrambled to close the door. My hands were shaking as I locked it, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I didn't know what I had seen, if I had seen anything at all, but the feeling of being watched was stronger than ever. It felt like the store was alive, like the walls were closing in on me, trapping me inside. I wanted to leave, to run out of that store and never look back, but I couldn't. I was trapped by a mix of fear and some strange compulsion, like the store was holding me in place. I forced myself to keep working, trying to ignore the pounding of my heart and the cold sweat that clung to my skin. The hours dragged on, each minute feeling like an eternity. The noises continued, footsteps, tapping, and the occasional whisper that sent shivers down my spine. But the figure didn't appear again, at least not visibly. I could still feel it, though, lurking just out of sight, waiting. It was around 4:30 a.m. when things took a turn for the worse. I was standing behind the counter, trying to distract myself by counting the cash in the register, when the lights began to flicker again. This time they didn't stop. They flickered on and off, plunging the store into darkness for a split second before the harsh fluorescent light returned. And then the radio crackled to life. It had been playing quietly in the background all night, tuned to some oldies station that barely came in through the static. But now the music was gone, replaced by a low, crackling hum. I stared at the radio, frozen in place, as a voice began to emerge from the static. It was faint at first, garbled and distorted, but it grew clearer with each passing second. It was a woman's voice, soft and melodic, but there was something off about it, something unnatural. "Come closer," the voice whispered, echoing through the store. "I need to see you." I didn't move. I couldn't. My legs felt like they were made of lead, rooted to the spot. The lights continued to flicker, casting the store in a stuttering, nightmarish light. The voice repeated its command, more insistent this time. "Come closer," it said, and I could hear a note of hunger in its tone, like it was desperate for me to obey. I felt a tug, a pull deep in my chest, urging me to step forward, to approach the radio. My body moved on its own, my feet shuffling across the floor, one slow step at a time. The closer I got, the louder the voice became, until it was all I could hear, drowning out the flickering lights and the pounding of my heart. Closer, it whispered, and I was standing right in front of the radio now, the static crackling in my ears. I reached out, my hand trembling as it moved toward the dial, as if to turn it up even louder. But before I could touch it, the lights went out completely. The store was plunged into total darkness, the only sound the crackling of the radio and the heavy, labored breathing that wasn't mine. I couldn't see anything, couldn't move, couldn't think. The air was thick, suffocating, and I felt something cold and slimy brush against my hand. I jerked back, stumbling in the dark, and the lights flickered back on for just a moment. That's when I saw it, the figure, inches from my face, its eyes glowing with a sickly yellow light, its mouth twisted into a grotesque grin. Its breath was rancid, like decay, and it reached out to me with long, bony fingers that seemed to stretch forever. The lights went out again, and the radio's static turned into a high-pitched screech, filling my head with a pain so intense I thought my skull would split open. I clapped my hands over my ears, trying to block out the noise, but it was inside me, vibrating through my bones. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The lights came back on, steady this time, and the store was empty. The figure was gone, the radio was silent, and the air was still once more. But the sense of dread remained, a heavy weight in the pit of my stomach. I knew it wasn't over, not yet. I didn't even think about it, I just grabbed my things and bolted for the door. The sun was just starting to rise, casting a pale gray light over the parking lot as I ran to my car. My hands were still shaking as I fumbled with the keys, desperate to get away from that place. I didn't go back to the store. I couldn't. I called Frank that afternoon and quit over the phone, making up some excuse about a family emergency. He didn't argue, just grunted in that gruff way of his and wished me luck. I left Pine Hollow the next day, driving as far and as fast as I could. I didn't care where I ended up, as long as it was far away from that town, that store. But no matter how far I went, I couldn't escape the memories of that night, the figure, the whispers, the radio. They haunted me, replaying over and over in my mind. A never-ending nightmare. It's been months now, and I've tried to move on with my life. But every night when the sun goes down and the world grows quiet, I can still hear the faint chime of the door opening, the soft tapping of fingers on glass, and the distant, echoing whispers calling out to me. I know it's still out there, waiting for me. And one day, I'm afraid it will find me.